I did a presentation on difficult conversations and how to have difficult conversations with people at our local study club that I run, which is a women in dentistry study club. It's super awesome. And a topic that I think not a lot of people cover, and I did cover in this talk, I thought would be great for this group. Which is about coaching team members to stay or coaching team members to exit. So let me explain. We all have team members in our office that are not performing to the standard or the level that we really wish that they would. Sometimes it's a lot of your team and sometimes it's just one person. And it's important to decide whether you want to coach that person to stay and be a superstar within your practice, or you want to coach that person to choose to exit your practice. Employment law is different in every single country, state, province, etc. I'm in Canada and in Alberta. And so I cannot give you legal advice on how you have to let employees go. I will give you some background though, because a lot of this comes from how things have to happen in Alberta. As a general rule, I could fire pretty much anyone in my practice as long as I pay them severance pay. So I don't have to have a reason. I just have to be able to pay them, 2 weeks or depending on how long they've been in the office. But if you want to fire someone for cause, so you want to get rid of someone immediately, you don't want them to stay, you don't want to have to pay them, I have to have documentation showing that they are incapable of doing their job, which just means enough stuff on paper that I can let them go with evidence that they could no longer continue in the position. And that was how I developed this idea of coach to stay or coach to exit. I hate having to let people go, and I would much rather they self-select themselves out. And that is what I try to do. So if there is someone that I have decided is a coach to exit team member, then the strategies I will teach you here, I coach them for them to choose to leave. They choose to find another position, to go look for work elsewhere, because it's been made abundantly clear to them through the things that I've done that this is not the place for them and that they're not a good fit for the practice, and they will leave. And if they don't choose to leave, if they're that stubborn, then I have enough written documentation that I can let them go and choose whether I pay severance or not, but I can choose to let them go. The more important one here is the coach to stay, which is what we're going to talk about first. Coach to stay is when you've identified a team member that needs a bit of help. You probably feel like they're a pretty decent human being and they're making some effort, and maybe they're really good at some things and not so good at other things. I truly, truly deep down believe that every willing employee, so every person who wants a job, can be coached to be a great employee. Maybe not superstar awesome, but definitely great. And if all of your team members are great or above, you're killing it, absolutely killing it. People who also feel like they're doing a great job at their job or better, stay at their jobs. People will stay where they feel challenged, where they feel appreciated, where they feel supported. Money is not the reason people stay at jobs. I believe everyone should be paid fairly, and you would know what the market rates are in your area. That's different all over the world. People stay when they feel like they are valued for what they bring to the situation, and they feel safe and supported in the environment that they work in and celebrated. If you've identified someone that you really want to pull from okay or good to great or higher, then you'll want to coach them to stay. I am saying the word coach a lot because that is what it is. It involves a lot of your time and energy, although I think incredibly worthwhile, because letting someone go, having to find someone new, hire them, train them, etc., costs you way more time and money than it will to coach someone to stay. It's going to take you building a connection with that person, providing them some one-on-one support, a lot of touch points with them to check in on how things are going. And you're going to be working very actively to find the good in everything that they're doing. We're going to start with coach to stay because this is the good feeling part of it all. Sometimes you'll think you're going into coach to stay and you will determine that it is actually a coach to exit. And that's okay. I always say I give people the benefit of the doubt. Start with the coach to stay. And if it turns out it's not going to happen, you can always flip into the coach to exit strategy. It is actually really hard to do it the other way. If you're coaching to exit and then you change your mind and think you might want to keep them, switching to coach to stay is a difficult transition because you would have set up some things you'll see here that are hard to reverse. Okay, let's start with how you begin the process of Coach to Stay. You're going to have a conversation with this team member in private. And for a lot of people, this feels a little bit icky. We don't like, as feminine in general, we don't like to sit down with people and tell them that we think they're struggling or that they could do better. And one of the reasons we don't like that is because of the response we generally get back, tears or defensiveness, right? Usually it's one or the other. So I'm going to give you a different approach here. If you're going to open the door, I guess, if you're going to open the door with them for this conversation, you need to start by building some rapport with them. And you need to be the leader of this conversation. Keep in mind that the feminine, and most of us have all women team members, really appreciates support and connection. So begin the conversation by telling them that you want to have a conversation with them to help support them in their role and for them to be successful and to be able to be with you long term and to really enjoy their time within your space. You don't have to start with what's going bad. And this first conversation is actually going to be all about them. You don't really want it to really have anything to do with you. Why? Because you want them to feel heard. And it's a great idea to find out where they think they're at. They might think they're superstar awesome at everything. They might think that they're doing a horrible job at everything. Likely they're somewhere in between. So start with simple questions like, do they enjoy their job? What's their favorite thing about their job? What's their least favorite thing about their job? Where do they think they might struggle? And your role is to actively listen and take notes. So have a notebook with you and take notes as you have this first conversation with them, finding all about what they need to be successful. You want to listen way more than you speak. Okay, so you're like active listening ears are on, and you're just going to let them talk. Ask probing questions. Ask them to explain more. Ask them why. Find out as much gold, I call it, as much detail as you possibly can about how they feel their place is within the practice. After you think they've gotten all of it out, so everything that they can get out of them, then it's your turn to speak. And you're simply going to tell them, wow, thank you for all this information. This is great. I really want to be able to support you in the office. And this is going to help me lay out a game plan or a strategy to help you to be the best you. So why don't we set up another meeting in a week's time, and we will go through all of this awesomeness, and I will have come up with a plan to get you to that next level in all the places where there's some improvement that could happen. Sound good? This takes away all defensiveness. And having this one really good conversation with a team member means the next time you approach them for a conversation, they remember that this went really well, that they felt heard, that they felt supported, and that you really just wanted to know all about them. The next conversation will be when you get to talk about the things that are important to you. Don't do both of these at the same time. Some people can probably handle it, but most people, you want them to walk away feeling really good about this first conversation. And then you're going to take your notes, and you are actually going to come up with a plan. And ideally, you put it in writing so that they'll be able to look at it with you, and you guys could have a checklist or something, but there's something written down that you will both have for taking steps going forward from there. One thing to keep in mind is when you go to make your plan, you can't simply write something down like you need to be a better communicator. That is not super helpful. Most people think that they're communicating just fine, and they only usually know how to communicate the way that they currently communicate. If you're going to make a statement about something that needs to improve, you must provide a resource. That resource could be you. You could say, you know, I want to sit down with you a few times and we'll role play some conversations and we'll talk about how I want that to look. Or you could give them a resource like, hey, there's this book that I really think would help you, and I'll even buy it for you. I just would really like you to read it. But provide them some kind of resource or tell them how they're going to learn that thing. For certain things that might be clinical skills, you might have spoken to another assistant and said, oh, you know what, I'm going to buddy you up with so-and-so for this procedure today. I really want you to, take notes and watch everything they do because we're going to start to model that behavior, whatever it is. You need to have a resource that you give them. Don't just list all of the things that need to improve. You, as the leader, have to have come up with a solution or some sort of path for them to follow for each item that you would like to see improvement in. Okay. Now, the next conversation that you have, I call it conversation number 2, and there could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 conversations. But the most important thing to remember is that you're going to take all of your notes from that first conversation, along with whatever you've witnessed within the office that you want to change. They might not have mentioned some of the things that you think need to change. That's okay. At this point, you're going to get to bring those things in, and you're going to have a plan. So what things need to change? What resources can you provide to facilitate this change? And how are the two of you going to measure success? How are they going to be held accountable? Let's say, just for fun, since I'm sure none of you have experienced this before, that you have an employee that struggles to get along with everyone else in the office. You have decided that this is not a coach to exit because you really think they're genuinely a good person and really have just learned some bad habits from maybe some previous workplaces. So you come to conversation number 2 with a written plan. It has a stated goal, so improving communication and rapport with coworkers. You share with them what you've observed, so tell them the things that you've witnessed that you're not a fan of, and then you share with them what your dream outcome would be. Let's just say that's a harmonious workplace. Then you let them know how you're going to help them make that happen. You'll provide them with all the resources you can, so I don't know, books, TED Talks, guidelines for communication in your office, whatever those things are, and you're going to get them to commit to taking different action. You're both going to sign off on the plan, and you're going to go. You will also have agreed upon touch points or checkpoints or places to hold her accountable. Here's where you may need to change what you're currently doing. After this plan has been laid out and you both signed off on it, which is awesome, and you've decided that you're going to, touch base at the end of every day or once a week, or depending on what the issues are, you can decide on what that touch point looks like. You are then going to make sure that you are catching that employee doing any and all things good as much as you possibly can. So you see an interaction that goes well with a team member. Great, go over and tell them. You see an interaction that goes well with another patient. You see a procedure go well. You see them, I don't know, using some downtime to do something productive. It doesn't matter what it is. You're not going to focus on the things that they haven't changed yet. It takes some time to learn new behaviors and skills and then to implement them. That's where the coaching comes in. That's where your touch points with them, weekly, daily, whatever that is. That's when you get to coach them and say, hey, what are you working on? Or what have you learned? Or what have you tried differently? Coaching is like being the cheerleader, being the one cheering them on, pushing them in the right direction, asking if they need help. Can you support them in some way? This is where that coach to stay energy is very different than a coach to exit energy. You are truly on their side and you are truly there for them to succeed. Very few leaders do it like this completely naturally because it takes intentionality to do this. Making someone feel like they are your top priority right now and in good ways, and then identifying all the things that they are succeeding in and pointing them out, even if those aren't the things you're working on, that's fine. It will pump them up and they'll be far more likely to take action on the things they need to work on. So that's the coach to stay strategy. You're going to learn all about them, build a bunch of rapport with them so that they feel really good having conversation with you. You're going to come up with a plan, lay it out. You're both going to agree on how you're going to run that, what resources you're going to give them, and how you're going to hold them accountable. You're both going to sign off on it. And then you are going to do your best to be the best damn cheerleader you know how to be. Catch them doing things right. When you have touch points with them, always hit the positive first. What are you working on? What have you tried new? Is there something that I can help you with? And you're going to keep those multiple touch points, and you will see this builds self-confidence and worthiness within someone. And so that starts to morph. So it's a lot of touch points. It's a lot of positivity, and it's a lot of accountability. But remember, you're coaching this person to be a stellar employee. I also highly recommend you only do this with one employee at a time because most of us don't have time to do more than that. So figure out who's your ideal and go from there. The next type of conversation we're going to talk about is a coach to exit. If you are trying to get rid of a bad apple, so someone who is toxic, dragging the team down, maybe you've tried everything else that I've spoken about and you really have seen no change at all. Then a coach to exit will involve a lot of energy from you but it's going to feel very different to the team member. You're going to have a lot of touch points because you're going to hold them to an incredibly high standard. You're going to document every single conversation you have with them, and they are going to sign off on it. And you're going to find the things that they are doing in a way that you don't want them to, and you're going to talk about them a lot. See how this feels very different from a coach to stay? A lot of leaders make the mistake of thinking they're coaching to stay, but having a coach to exit conversation, meaning they come to an employee who they probably don't talk to a ton, and every time they go to talk to them, they're telling them something they're doing wrong. Doesn't make people feel very good about themselves, and it also doesn't motivate them to do anything differently. But if you've decided you want them to leave, then this might be a good way, especially if you're like me and you'd like them to self-select themselves out of the practice. This is a great way to do it. Okay, conversation number 1 in a coach to exit. This is different than a coach to stay. You still need to be, your calm, confident self. There's no need for anger or frustration or any of those energies here. But this conversation isn't actually about them. It's about what you need from them. So you are going to very calmly and clearly lay out where they are failing, and you're going to tell them directly and compassionately what you need them to do differently. You're going to have a document prepared ahead of time for this conversation, and they will sign that document because it's going to lay out what the plan is over the next weeks or months, whatever timeline you want to set up for this. You're likely going to have either daily or weekly check-ins with them that they're going to be made aware of at this meeting. And you're going to let them know that you are watching them very closely and that they must start to do things differently, effective immediately. Whether you provide resources to them or not is completely up to you. I do recommend it only because the rare human will shock the hell out of you and actually do what you ask. And then you may be able to try to transform it into a coach to stay. It doesn't happen often, but there's probably no harm in saying, hey, if you read this book, I think it'll really help you. So up to you whether you provide resources or not. This is going to show you right away if they're willing to change. If they aren't, if what you've asked is too much for them or they're just unwilling to do anything different, they're going to start to feel very uncomfortable in your practice. And this is sort of the point. So here's the little tip for you. In this conversation, because you didn't take time to build rapport with them and for them to feel heard, and they probably feel like they're struggling a little bit in the practice already, what often happens is they either start to cry or they start to get really defensive. Usually the toxic ones get defensive. They start to get really defensive and start rattling off all the reasons why you're wrong, and this is everyone's fault. So they go into victim and they start blaming. You need to shut that down immediately. So if they start going into defensiveness, you just, calmly and firmly state, this conversation is not about other people. It's not about what you think is happening. I'm telling you what I think is happening. You basically have to just shut it down and tell them that they need to listen to what you have to say. Otherwise, you end up in this battle where you're going back and forth on this, and there is no benefit to doing that. Do not let them hijack the conversation. You have a plan, so just stick to it. You lay out your plan, you lay out your steps, you give them resources if you want, and then you agree to meet up again. So let's say you've decided with this person you're going to do weekly check-ins. So you agree, okay, we're going to meet again next Thursday at the end of the day and see where everything's at. Okay, if you're going to move on to conversation 2 or further in a coach to exit situation, remember that you have everything from conversation number 1 on paper. So you have written down in writing everything that they're going to do immediately. So make sure you have this document handy so you can pull it out every time you talk to them. Where you're going to put your time and energy in here between conversations is in observing them as much as you can. And every time you see or hear something that you don't like, you're going to try to catch it and document it. So you've got it written down somewhere and talk about it that day if possible. You really want them to feel like you're watching their every move because you are. And remember, the idea here is to make them wildly uncomfortable. And you never have to get angry or upset or frustrated or raise your voice or any of that. You can do this in a calm, confident, kind, compassionate way. There is no reason to be mean or angry or any of it. You're going to be neutral about it. Oh, I just heard you on the phone with so-and-so. You didn't come across very friendly. You weren't smiling when you were on the phone. I heard you say XYZ, and I do not want conversations happening that way. Please say it this way from now on, and you walk away, right? After you have 3 separate write-ups, at least for me, if they have not chosen to exit, then I let them go. In Canada, probably anywhere in Canada, and I know in Alberta for sure, 3 write-ups signed by doctor and employee are enough to let someone go for cause. Yes, of course, people can, here they could get mad and try to do other things, but that documentation for any employment lawyer I've spoken to is all that's required. So what's going to happen is, because you've been taking notes, so let's say you meet every Thursday and you've been taking notes from Thursday to Thursday, when you meet for the following Thursday, you will have a new document that says, hey, I know I asked you to work on blah, 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 blah. This is what was still happening this week, which is not acceptable. This must change immediately, and have them sign below that they will change that immediately. So just make sure that you have a paper trail of all the things you've spoken about, so that you have documentation should you need it. But again, most of these people will just choose to leave if they feel like they just aren't capable of doing what you want, or they are unwilling. So there you have it. In my mind, there are 2 different ways to coach a team member that is struggling. The decision is yours. Is this someone that you want to keep and help grow, or is this someone that really just needs to leave? And then you get to choose. The good news is I've only really ever had to coach to exit like twice, I think, in the entire time I've been working, because most people fall in the coach to stay category. Most people, even with bad habits from other practices, can be turned around just with some good coaching, some resources, having a great culture in your office that sort of like lifts them up. There's so many layers to this, but this general idea is one to keep in your head. A key point: the feminine really does well when they are approached with validation and support. That building rapport step, I'm not saying you have to be friends with your team. That's not what I'm saying. You can be if you want, but that's not what I'm saying. But that building rapport step, the letting them know that you're on their side, that you value them, that you want to be there as their support, building that piece up means that pretty much anything can be overcome. If they're willing to learn, and most people are, most people appreciate a challenge, then you can coach those people to stay. And I think the vast majority of team members can be coached to stay. I'll see you guys next week for another video. I hope you have an awesome rest of your week. Bye-bye.